Before time existed as mortals know it, before there were seasons, tides, or the first dawn over the earth, the universe was an open wound called chaos. There was no form, there was no light, there was no direction, only a vast and endless void that pulsed like the womb of something that had not yet been born. And from that void, like a moan that becomes a scream, the first forces that would shape all of existence emerged. Gaia, the earth, rose with her vast and solid body, stretching in every direction like a stage set for a play that had no actors yet. Then came Eros, the primordial impulse that compelled all things to seek one another, to unite, to create. And from the darkest depths of the void, Tartarus took shape. The bottomless abyss where one day the worst horrors of the cosmos would be imprisoned. But that would come later, much later. Gaia, alone in her immensity, did something that would change the fate of all ages. She brought forth from herself Uranus, the sky, and spread him above her like a starlit mantle that covered her entirely. Uranus was vast, he was beautiful, and together, Gaia and Uranus, earth and sky joined in the first cosmic embrace from which an entire generation of gods would be born. But what seemed like the beginning of something glorious was, in truth, the start of a tragedy that would have no end. From that union the 12 Titans were born, 6 males and 6 females, beings of staggering power who embodied the fundamental forces of the universe. Oceanus, the infinite river that encircled the earth. Coeus, the Titan of celestial intelligence. Creus, lord of the stellar constellations. Hyperion, father of the light of the sun. Iapetus, the ancestor of mortals. And the youngest of all, Cronus, whose name would echo through the ages as a synonym for destruction and power. Among the Titanesses were Theia, Rhea, Themis, Mnemosyne, Phoebe, and Tethys, each one a bearer of an essential aspect of the cosmos. But Gaia did not stop there. She also gave birth to the 3 Cyclopes, one-eyed beings whose hands could forge the hardest materials in the universe, and to the 3 Hecatonchires, creatures of 100 arms and 50 heads, whose mere presence made the earth tremble. Uranus looked upon his children, and what he saw did not please him. The Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires were too powerful, too unpredictable, too monstrous for the order he intended to impose upon the cosmos. And so, without mercy or remorse, he locked them away in the deepest darkness of Gaia, in the very bowels of the earth, plunging them into Tartarus. Gaia felt the pain of her children as though they were open wounds inside her own body. Every scream of the Hecatonchires was an earthquake. Every sob of the Cyclopes was an underground storm. And the earth decided that Uranus would pay for what he had done. It was done. The first betrayal of the cosmos had been planted. Gaia secretly forged a sickle of adamantine, a material harder than any known rock, sharper than the edge of destiny itself. She gathered her children, the Titans, and asked them to punish their father. The silence that followed was crushing. None dared raise a hand against the sky. None except one. Cronus, the youngest, the most ambitious, the most ruthless, took the sickle in his hands and accepted the task without hesitation. That night, when Uranus descended upon Gaia to cover her with his starry mantle, Cronus waited hidden in the shadows. The strike was swift, precise, irreversible. The sickle cut through the flesh of the sky, and Uranus howled with a pain that pierced every dimension of the universe. From the blood that fell upon the earth, the Erinyes were born, spirits of vengeance who, from that day forward, would pursue anyone who spilled the blood of their own kin. The giants were also born, armed with gleaming spears, and the Meliae, nymphs of the ash trees. The cosmos had witnessed its first act of violence, and it would not be the last. Uranus, mutilated and humiliated, uttered a curse before withdrawing forever. His words fell upon Cronus like a slab of stone. One day he told him his own children would destroy him, exactly as he had destroyed his father. The cycle would not be broken. Power would devour whoever possessed it. And Cronus, who had just conquered the throne of the universe, felt for the first time something he had never experienced: fear. The days that followed were strange. Cronus sat upon the empty throne of his father and ruled over the Titans with a firm hand. He took his sister Rhea as his wife, and together they presided over what some would call the Golden Age, a time when mortals lived like gods, without labor, without illness, without aging. But within Cronus, the curse of Uranus writhed like a hungry creature that never stopped growing. Every night his father's words returned: "Your own children will destroy you." And Cronus, instead of seeking redemption or trying to be different from what his father had been, chose the darkest path of all. When Rhea gave birth to her first daughter, Hestia, Cronus took her in his hands. He looked at her, and he devoured her whole. Rhea's scream tore through the halls of the palace of the Titans like a crack spreading across a wall. But Cronus did not stop. When Demeter was born, he devoured her too. Then came Hera, devoured, then Hades, devoured, then Poseidon, devoured. 5 children, 5 gods trapped in the darkness of their own father's belly. Rhea carried a grief that no mother should ever know. She had felt life grow inside her 5 times, had held her children in her arms for barely an instant, and had watched them disappear into the jaws of her husband 5 times. But fate was not finished with her. And then the 6th arrived. Rhea knew with the certainty that only a mother who has lost everything possesses that this child would be different, that this child would not vanish into the darkness, that this child would change the course of all ages. She went to Gaia, her own mother, the earth herself, and together they devised a plan that would save the child and condemn Cronus. When the moment of birth drew near, Rhea traveled in secret to the island of Crete, far from the eyes of her husband, far from the throne of the Titans, far from everything that could destroy her son. In a cave hidden in the mountains, surrounded by the sound of the wind and the protective darkness of the rock, Rhea gave birth to her 6th child, ZEUS. The cry of the newborn echoed off the walls of the cave with a force that was not normal. There was something in that cry that was unlike any sound the earth had ever heard before. There was power, there was promise, there was destiny, but there was also danger, because if Cronus heard that cry, all would be lost. Rhea acted with the desperation of someone who has no more chances. She took a stone the size of a newborn, wrapped it in swaddling clothes, and presented it to Cronus as though it were his son. The Titan took it without looking, without doubting, without feeling the difference between the cold stone and the warm flesh of a god. And he devoured it. The deception had worked. ZEUS was alive. In the cave on Crete, far from his father's reach, the young god was entrusted to the care of Amalthea, who fed him with her divine milk, and to the nymphs Adrasteia and Ida, who watched over him day and night. But the greatest danger remained the sound. Every time Zeus cried, his voice could reach the ears of Cronus. And then the Curetes appeared, divine warriors of Crete who surrounded the cave and began to strike their bronze shields with their spears, creating a constant clamor that drowned out every other sound. Day and night, without rest, without pause. The noise of the Curetes became the first war song of the universe, and its sole purpose was to protect the child who would one day rule over all the gods. Zeus grew fast, faster than any mortal or immortal ever had. His body filled with a strength that had no precedent, and his mind developed a cunning that rivaled that of the wisest Titans. The years in the cave had shaped him, solitude had hardened him. The story of his devoured siblings had filled him with an unbreakable purpose. It was not merely rage that burned within him. It was justice. It was inevitability. It was the weight of a prophecy that could not be stopped. But destiny is not fulfilled by strength alone. It also demands intelligence. When Zeus reached maturity, he found Metis, the Oceanid of wisdom and deep thought, daughter of Oceanus and Tethys. Metis was the most brilliant mind among all the immortals, capable of seeing the threads of fate before they were woven. It was she who designed the plan that would bring Cronus's reign to an end. She prepared a mixture, a powerful emetic that would force the Titan to regurgitate everything he had swallowed. Zeus presented himself before his father in disguise, according to some sources as a cupbearer, and managed to make Cronus drink the potion without suspecting a thing. What followed was the moment that changed the universe. Cronus felt a convulsion that was born from the deepest part of his entrails. His body arched, his throat opened, and first he vomited the stone that Rhea had wrapped in swaddling clothes. That rock, he had believed, was his youngest son. The stone fell upon the earth and from that day forward was consecrated at Delphi as the Omphalos, the navel of the world, an eternal monument to the deception that had saved the future king of the gods. And after the stone, one by one, the 5 siblings of Zeus emerged from their father's belly. Poseidon came out, with eyes burning with silent fury. Hades emerged with the gaze of one who has seen the most absolute darkness and has learned to dwell within it. Hera appeared with a dignity and tact that defied the years of imprisonment. Demeter arose with the serene strength of the earth that waits beneath the winter. And Hestia, the first to be devoured and the last to be freed, came forth with the calm of a flame that never dies. The 6 children of Cronus were together for the first time, and war was about to begin. Zeus led his siblings to Mount Olympus, the tallest mountain in Thessaly, whose summit vanished among the clouds and grazed the sky itself. From there, with the stars at their backs and the world at their feet, Zeus declared war against his father and against all the Titans who would support him. On the other side of the battlefield, on Mount Othrys, Cronus gathered his allies, Iapetus, fierce and merciless, Hyperion, lord of light, Coeus, Crius and their descendants, and at the front of them all, as general of the Titan army, stood Atlas, the son of Iapetus, whose strength was legendary even among the immortals. But not all the Titans chose the side of Cronus. Oceanus, the primordial Titan of the river that encircled the earth, remained neutral, and 2 crucial figures decided to join Zeus. Themis, the Titaness of divine justice, saw in the young god something that Cronus had lost long ago. And Prometheus, the son of Iapetus, gifted with the power of foresight, knew before anyone else that the Titans would lose that war. Prometheus tried to convince his father, Iapetus, and his brother Atlas not to resist, but it was in vain. The pride of the Titans was stronger than reason. The Titanomachy had begun. The first clashes shook the foundations of the world. From Olympus, the young gods launched their attacks against the positions on Othrys. From Othrys, the Titans responded with a fury that was millennia old. The mountains trembled, the rivers overflowed. The sky split apart with every collision between forces that were not of this world. But neither side could gain a decisive advantage. The Titans were ancient, powerful, born from the primordial union of earth and sky. And the Olympians, though young and determined, lacked the weapons needed to break the balance. 10 years. The war lasted 10 full years without a clear victor. 10 years of battles that shook the earth from its roots to its highest peaks. 10 years of titanic clashes that tore mountains from their foundations and turned them into projectiles. 10 years in which the entire cosmos seemed on the verge of shattering to pieces. And when despair began to settle into the hearts of the Olympians, Gaia spoke. The earth herself, who had witnessed every battle, every sacrifice and every drop of ichor spilled, revealed to Zeus the secret that would change the course of the war. Victory would only be possible if Zeus freed the prisoners of Tartarus, the Cyclopes, the Hecatonchires, the creatures that Uranus had imprisoned out of fear and that Cronus had kept captive for the very same reason. Zeus descended into the abyss. Tartarus was not a place. It was an absence, a bottomless fall that, according to Hesiod, would require 9 days and 9 nights for a bronze anvil dropped from the surface to reach its floor. The darkness was so thick it seemed to have weight, and the silence was so deep it ached. Zeus slew Campe, the monstrous warden who guarded the prisoners, and opened the gates of the oldest prison in the universe. The Cyclopes looked upon him with their single eye, gleaming like a lone star in the middle of the night, and understood what Zeus was offering them: freedom in exchange for loyalty. And the Hecatoncheires, with their 100 arms stretched out like the branches of an impossible forest, accepted without hesitation. The Cyclopes, masters of the cosmic forge, wasted no time. Brontes, Steropes, and Argus set to work immediately, using the fire from the center of the earth and the purest metals in the universe. For Zeus, they forged the weapon that would define his reign forever: the thunderbolt. It was not merely a discharge of energy. It was the will of the cosmos, concentrated into a single point of light and destruction. Each bolt contained the fury of a storm, the precision of a divine judgment, and the power to annihilate anything it touched. For Poseidon, they forged the trident, a weapon capable of commanding the seas, triggering earthquakes, and splitting the earth with a single blow. And for Hades, they crafted the Helm of Darkness, a relic that rendered its wearer invisible, allowing him to move undetected by any living or divine being. The balance had been shattered. The first to formally join Zeus was Styx, the goddess of the river that separated the world of the living from the dead, daughter of Oceanus. She came to Olympus accompanied by her 4 children: Nike, victory; Kratos, strength; Zealous, fervor; and Bia, violence. The 4 became the permanent guardians of Zeus's throne. Nike would drive the god's chariot during the war, and the name of Styx would become the most sacred and unbreakable oath among the gods, a pact that not even the Lord of Olympus could violate. The final battle arrived like a dawn of fire. The Hecatoncheires positioned themselves behind the Olympian lines with their combined 300 arms, ready to unleash destruction. At Zeus's signal, they began to tear loose rocks the size of hills and hurl them against the positions on Mount Othrys with a frequency and a force that no Titan had ever faced. The sky darkened under the rain of stones, the earth groaned beneath the impact. And while the Titans struggled to defend themselves against that impossible avalanche, Zeus raised his arm and hurled the first thunderbolt. The cosmos stood still for an instant. The blast crossed the sky with a radiance that blinded gods and Titans alike. The thunder that followed was so powerful that it made Tartarus itself tremble. Hesiod recorded that the earth roared, the wide sky above rumbled. The sea, the streams of Oceanus, and Tartarus itself resounded before that power. The heat wave that emanated from the thunderbolts of Zeus was so intense that even the Titans imprisoned in the abyss felt it in their bones. The world burned, and the Titans knew they had lost. One by one, they fell. Atlas was the last to surrender, the general who had led the Titan legions with a ferocity that no other matched. But not even his legendary strength could withstand the combined force of Zeus's thunderbolts, the boulders of the Hecatoncheires, and the united power of the 6 Olympians. The Titans were chained and cast into Tartarus, into the very cells where the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires had once been held. Poseidon sealed the gates with bronze locks. The Hecatoncheires were posted as eternal sentinels, and Atlas received a punishment of his own, a punishment that would last until the end of time. Zeus condemned him to hold the vault of the sky upon his shoulders, bearing the weight of the heavens as a perpetual reminder of what happens to those who oppose the new order. The Titanomachy was over. But the work of Zeus had barely begun. The three sons of Cronus gathered to decide how the cosmos would be divided. They did not do so by force or by the right of the strongest. They did so by drawing lots. According to Apollodorus, each one drew a portion, and fate decided who would rule what. Zeus was allotted the sky, the atmosphere, and supreme authority over all gods and mortals. Poseidon received dominion over the seas and all the waters of the world. And Hades was assigned the underworld, the realm of the dead, that somber and silent territory that stretched beneath the land of the living. The earth itself and Olympus were declared common ground, but no one doubted who the true sovereign was. Zeus sat upon the highest throne of Olympus, and from there distributed honors, titles and domains to every god who had supported him. So Hesiod recorded it in the Theogony. The gods acclaimed Zeus as king, and he apportioned among them their rightful privileges and honors. Silence over Olympus. The first dawn of a new age. If this story has you gripped, subscribe now and hit the bell. Here, every narrative is a journey through the myths that shaped civilizations. And what comes next in the story of Zeus will chill your blood, because the throne he had just conquered was about to be attacked by forces that would make the Titanomachy look like child's play. Gaia had not forgotten. The earth, who had helped Zeus overthrow Cronus, now watched with fury as her other children, the Titans, languished in chains in Tartarus. The same mother who had conspired against Uranus and then against Cronus was now conspiring against Zeus. The pattern was clear. Gaia served no king. Gaia served balance, and when that balance was broken, she created whatever force was necessary to restore it, or to destroy everything. The giants were born from the blood that Uranus had spilled upon Gaia when Cronus mutilated him. They were enormous, savage, with long matted hair, beards that dragged along the ground, and lower limbs covered in scales. According to Apollodorus, their appearance was terrifying, and their strength was surpassed only by their arrogance. They carried gleaming spears, and their sole purpose was to destroy Olympus and everything Zeus had built. But there was a prophecy. The giants could not be defeated by the gods alone. Victory required the intervention of a mortal. Gaia, upon learning of this prophecy, sought a magical herb, a pharmacon that would render the giants invulnerable even to death. Zeus, however, was faster. He commanded Eos, the dawn, Selene, the moon, and Helios, the sun, to cease shining. The world was plunged into total darkness. And in that darkness, Zeus harvested every last trace of the herb before Gaia could find it. Then he sent Athena to summon Heracles, the greatest of all mortal heroes, his own son, born of a human woman. The Gigantomachy erupted on the plain of Phlegra. The first confrontation was between Heracles and Alcyoneus, the most powerful of the giants, a being who was immortal as long as he touched the earth where he had been born. Heracles struck him down with an arrow, but every time the giant fell upon the soil of Palin, his strength regenerated. Heracles understood. He dragged him beyond his native land and killed him for good far from it. Porphyrion, the king of the giants, hurled himself at Hera with uncontrolled fury. Zeus intervened by inspiring an irrational lust in him for the goddess, and when Porphyrion tried to force himself upon her, Zeus struck him with a thunderbolt, while Heracles finished him with an arrow. Enceladus fled the battlefield, but Athena pursued him and hurled the entire island of Sicily upon him, burying him forever beneath tons of rock and earth. Ephialtes was brought down by Apollo and Heracles, each firing an arrow into a different eye. Polybotes was chased by Poseidon across the sea until they reached the island of Kos, where the god of the sea tore a fragment from the island and crushed him beneath it. Every god found his rival. Hephaestus launched missiles of white-hot metal against Mimas. Hecate incinerated Clytius with her torches. Dionysus struck down Eurytus with his sacred thyrsus. Hermes, wearing the helm of darkness that belonged to Hades, turned invisible and slew Hippolytus. The Moirai themselves, the weavers of fate, descended onto the battlefield wielding clubs of bronze and destroyed Agrius and Thoas. The victory was absolute. The giants were crushed, but Gaia did not stop. What came next was something no god had imagined. Gaia, consumed by a rage that transcended reason, united with Tartarus itself, the darkest chasm of the universe. And from that union was born the most horrifying creature that had ever existed, Typhon. His birth was not an event, it was a catastrophe. According to Hesiod, Typhon emerged from Gaia with a force that made the roots of the world shudder. According to Apollodorus, his size was so colossal that his head grazed the stars and his outstretched arms reached from the west to the east. From the waist up, he had a humanoid form, but from the waist down, his body was made of colossal coils of reptilian creatures that writhed and twisted around one another. From his hands sprouted 100 dragon heads. His entire body was covered in wings. Fire poured from his eyes, and from his 100 throats came sounds that mimicked the voices of the gods, roars that echoed against mountains, and wails that struck terror into every being that heard them. The gods saw him coming, and they fled. It was the only time in the entire history of the cosmos that the Olympians ran. According to Apollodorus, when they saw Typhon approaching, hurling incandescent boulders at the sky and spewing torrents of flame, the gods scattered in every direction. Ovid adds that they fled all the way to Egypt, where they disguised themselves by assuming the forms of creatures to conceal their divine identity. Olympus stood empty, the thrones abandoned, the torches extinguished. Only one did not run. Zeus took up his thunderbolts. He took the adamantine sickle, the same weapon with which Cronus had mutilated Uranus generations before, and he faced Typhon alone. The battle that followed was the most devastating the cosmos had ever witnessed. It surpassed the Titanomachy. It surpassed the Gigantomachy. It was the ultimate clash between order and chaos, between the will of a god and the fury of a primordial force that obeyed no law. Zeus struck first from a distance, hurling thunderbolts at the 100 heads of Typhon. Hesiod wrote that the earth roared with a terrible sound, the wide sky above rumbled. The sea, the streams of Oceanus, and Tartarus resounded. The heat wave was so intense that it made even Hades tremble upon his subterranean throne. Typhon staggered, wounded but not vanquished. Zeus closed in for hand-to-hand combat, pursuing the monster to Mount Cassius, which rose over Syria. There, wielding the adamantine sickle, Zeus attacked directly. Victory seemed imminent. And then the unthinkable happened. Typhon, with a superhuman effort, summoned all his remaining strength and wrapped Zeus in his colossal coils. The limbs that formed the lower half of his body closed around the god like a living trap, crushing his body with a pressure that would have destroyed any other being. And while Zeus struggled to break free, Typhon wrenched the sickle from his hands and turned it against him. He severed the sinews of his hands and feet. The supreme god of Olympus, the vanquisher of Cronus, the conqueror of the Titans, the destroyer of the giants, was left completely incapacitated, without sinews, without strength, without thunder. The cosmos held its breath. Typhon hoisted the inert body of Zeus onto his shoulders and carried it across the sea to the Corician cave in Cilicia. There he hid the god's sinews inside a skin and left them in the care of Delphin, a creature half woman and half dragon who guarded the entrance of the cave with relentless ferocity. The Lord of Olympus lay prisoner in a cave, stripped of that which made him divine. The throne was empty. The thunderbolt lay useless, and for the first time since the birth of the cosmos, there was no one seated at the summit of the universe, but two gods moved in the shadows, Hermes, the messenger of the gods, master of cunning and speed, and Aegypon, the goat god of the wild flocks, devised a plan to rescue Zeus. They infiltrated the Corycian cave without being detected. They recovered the god's sinews and restored them to his body while Delphine was not watching. According to Apollodorus, Zeus regained his strength at once. His hands clenched, his feet found the ground, and thunder roared once more. Zeus emerged from that cave like a storm unleashed after centuries of containment. He mounted a chariot drawn by winged creatures and pursued Typhon from the sky, hurling thunderbolts without rest. The Moirai, according to one tradition, tricked Typhon by offering him ephemeral fruits, convincing him they would grant him greater strength when in truth they weakened him. Typhon fled to Thrace, and there, desperate, he began to tear entire mountains from the earth and hurl them at Zeus. But the god's thunderbolts were faster. Every mountain was sent back with the impact of a lightning strike, and the blood that poured from Typhon soaked the slopes of Mount Haemus, which, according to tradition, received its name from the divine blood that seeped into its rocks. Typhon fled south, crossing the sea towards Sicily. Zeus did not hesitate. He gathered all his strength, all the power the Cyclopes had forged for him, all the authority the cosmos had granted him, and he hurled Mount Etna itself upon the body of Typhon. The mountain fell with a crash that was heard in every corner of the known world. Typhon was buried beneath millions of tons of rock and earth, trapped forever in a prison of volcanic stone. Ever since, according to Greek tradition, the eruptions of Etna are the death throes of Typhon, the fire he still spews from his eternal prison, a perpetual reminder that even beneath the heaviest mountain in the world, chaos never fully sleeps. It was done. The throne was his, definitively. Zeus returned to Olympus, and this time no one disputed his authority. The gods who had fled returned with shame, etched upon their immortal faces. Order had been restored, but Zeus was not naive. He knew that power invited rebellion, that every throne was merely a seat on loan from fate, and that the curse of Uranus coursed through his family's veins like an underground river that no dam could contain. Your own children will destroy you. The same words that Uranus had spoken against Cronus now weighed upon Zeus like a shadow that never faded. His first wife was Metis, the Oceanid who had helped him free his siblings. Metis was pure intelligence, wisdom in its most refined form. But Gaia and Uranus revealed to Zeus a prophecy that froze his immortal blood. After giving birth to a daughter, Metis would conceive a son who would dethrone the father of gods and men. A son who would be more powerful than Zeus. A son who would repeat the eternal cycle. Zeus contemplated that prophecy and saw reflected in it his own fate, his own history, the endless echo of Uranus, Cronus, and now himself. And he did what every absolute ruler does when fear exceeds reason. He swallowed Metis. He did not devour her as Cronus had devoured his children. He absorbed her whole, incorporating her wisdom into his own being, ensuring that she could never conceive the son who had been foretold. From within Zeus, Metis continued to exist, counseling him in silence, guiding his decisions from the depths of his divine being. The prophesied son was never born, but the daughter was. One day, Zeus felt an unbearable pain in his head, a pain unlike anything he had experienced, not even when Typhon had ripped out his sinews. The pain grew, it pulsed, it expanded, until his skull split open, and from his head emerged a figure fully armed, with helmet, spear, and shield, letting out a war cry that echoed across all of Olympus. It was Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, born directly from the head of Zeus, with no visible mother, daughter of the supreme god and of absolute intelligence. Her birth was so violent and so glorious that the gods recoiled in wonder. Athena became the favorite daughter of Zeus, the only one to whom he would ever allow to wield his thunderbolt, the supreme strategist who would never lose a battle. But the birth of Athena caused a fracture elsewhere. Hera, the sister and wife of Zeus, who had become queen of Olympus with a fierce dignity and an unbreakable pride, saw in the birth of Athena a direct affront. Zeus had produced a daughter without needing his wife, without needing any woman. Hera, consumed by humiliation, resolved to prove she could do the same. Without joining with Zeus or any other god, Hera brought forth on her own Hephaestus, the god of fire and the forge. But Hephaestus was born with a deformity that Hera could not accept, lame, imperfect. A reminder that her act of defiance had not produced the perfection she had hoped for. She hurled him from Olympus. The god fell for an entire day before crashing onto the island of Lemnos, where he was rescued and raised by the nymphs of the sea. The gods were no better than the titans they had replaced. The cycle continued. Zeus ruled with a combination of justice, authority, and a reverential fear that kept every immortal in line. Homer called him father of gods and men, not because he was the biological progenitor of all, but because his authority was absolute and indisputable. In the Iliad, Zeus declared that if all the gods were to pull one end of a golden chain fastened to Olympus, they could not drag him down, but if he were to pull the other end, he could lift the earth and the sea together. No one challenged that claim, but absolute power did not protect him from treachery. Homer also recounts that there was a moment when 3 Olympian gods conspired against Zeus. Hera, Poseidon, and Athena, each with their own reasons, attempted to chain the king of the gods and strip him of his throne. They bound him with divine ropes while he slept. Zeus, immobilized, faced the very real possibility of being deposed by his own. But Thetis, the Nereid, mother of Achilles, learned of the conspiracy and summoned Briareus, one of the Hecatonchires, to ascend to Olympus. When the 3 conspirators saw the creature of 100 arms seated beside the throne of Zeus, they abandoned their plan at once. The fear of the Hecatonchires was older than Olympus itself. Zeus did not forget that betrayal, but neither did he destroy the guilty. The rule of Zeus extended over every aspect of the cosmos. He established the divine laws. He guaranteed sacred oaths. He protected supplicants and strangers. He presided over justice and punished the mortals and immortals who transgressed the order. But his relationship with mortals was always complex, marked by distance, caprice, and a constant tension between protection and punishment. And it was on that ground that his most philosophical conflict arose. Prometheus, the Titan who had fought on the side of Zeus during the Titanomachy, the son of Iapetus, who had chosen wisdom over family loyalty. Prometheus, whose name meant the one who thinks ahead, was perhaps the most intelligent being in the cosmos after Metis, and it was he who created the mortals, molding them from water and earth according to Apollodorus, giving them form and purpose in a world that until then had been the exclusive domain of the gods. But Prometheus made a mistake that would forever change the relationship between gods and men. At Mecone, as Hesiod recounts, the gods and mortal humans gathered to establish the terms of sacrifice, how the offerings would be divided between men and gods. Prometheus prepared a deception. He slaughtered a great ox and divided it into 2 piles. In one he placed all the meat and most of the fat, covering it with the stomach and the entrails so that it would look revolting. In the other, he arranged the white bones and covered them with a layer of glistening, appetizing fat so they would appear to be the finest portion. He offered Zeus the choice, and Zeus, according to some accounts, was deceived. According to others, he saw through the trick but allowed it so he would have an excuse to punish mortals. Regardless of the version, Zeus chose the gleaming fat and discovered the bones beneath. His fury was immediate. From that day forward, mortals kept the meat of the sacrifices for nourishment, and the gods received only the smoke of the burned bones. But Zeus was not satisfied with a change in rituals. He wanted mortals to suffer, and he took fire from them. Without fire, men were defenseless against the night, against the cold, against the darkness that surrounded them. Without fire, they could not cook, could not forge tools, could not protect themselves from the beasts that prowled in the shadows. Prometheus would not accept it. The Titans stole fire from Olympus and hid it inside the hollow stalk of a fennel reed. He carried it to the earth and delivered it to mortals, restoring the spark that Zeus had taken from them. When Zeus saw the glow of human bonfires illuminating the night from his throne on Olympus, his rage was without precedent. It was not merely the theft that enraged him, it was the defiance. It was the idea that a Titan, however much he had been an ally, could subvert the will of the king of the gods. The punishment was twofold. For mortals, Zeus ordered the creation of Pandora, the first woman according to Hesiod. Hephaestus shaped her from clay, giving her an irresistible beauty. Athena taught her the domestic crafts and dressed her in magnificent garments. Aphrodite granted her grace and desire, and Hermes placed within her breast a deceitful heart and lying words. Zeus sent her as a gift to Epimetheus, the brother of Prometheus, whose name meant the one who thinks after. Prometheus had warned his brother never to accept gifts from Zeus, but Epimetheus, dazzled by the beauty of Pandora, received her without suspicion. And when Pandora opened the jar she had brought with her, all the evils of the world spilled forth upon humanity. Disease, pain, old age, despair. Only hope remained trapped inside, at the bottom of the vessel, just before Pandora was able to close it. For Prometheus, the punishment was worse. Zeus ordered him chained to a rock on the highest peak of the Caucasus, with unbreakable chains forged by Hephaestus. Every dawn, a winged creature sent by Zeus himself descended upon the body of the Titan and tore open his belly to devour his liver, which in Greek tradition was considered the center of human emotions. And every night the liver regenerated, growing back inside the body of Prometheus, so that at the following dawn the torment would begin again. An eternal cycle of agony and regeneration, of destruction and rebirth, of punishment without end. The gods watched and said nothing. Prometheus endured that torment for entire generations of mortals. His scream became part of the landscape of the Caucasus, a sound as constant as the wind among the rocks. Ages would pass before Heracles, the mortal son of Zeus, climbed that mountain and slew the winged creature with one of his arrows, finally freeing the Titan from his torment. Zeus permitted that liberation, not out of compassion, but because Prometheus possessed knowledge that the king of the gods needed. Prometheus knew that if Zeus were to unite with the Nereid Thetis, she would bear a son more powerful than his father. A prophecy that would have repeated the eternal cycle once more. In exchange for his freedom, Prometheus revealed this secret, and Zeus, forewarned, gave Thetis in marriage to the mortal Peleus. From that union was born Achilles, the deadliest warrior of the Trojan War, a demigod whose glory would shine brighter than that of any mortal before or after him. Fate once more had been sidestepped, but not defeated. Zeus reigned from Olympus with an authority that no other being had ever wielded. He sired children with goddesses and mortals who became fundamental figures of Greek mythology. With Leto he had Apollo and Artemis. With Maia he fathered Hermes. With Semele he conceived Dionysus, whose birth was as tumultuous as that of Athena. For Semele was consumed by the radiance of the true form of Zeus, and the god had to stitch the child inside his own thigh to complete his gestation. With Danae he fathered Perseus, who would sever the head of Medusa. With Alcmene, assuming the form of her husband, he fathered Heracles, the hero whose strength surpassed that of any mortal and whose feats would resound until the end of time. But every child was also a possibility that the prophecy would be fulfilled. Zeus lived with that contradiction engraved upon his immortal being. Every descendant was an extension of his power, and at the same time, a potential threat to his throne. Every alliance was an opportunity and a risk. Every decision was a calculation between glory and survival. Because the God who had dethroned his father knew better than anyone that power is not eternal, that every king is also a prisoner of his crown. That prophecy need not be fulfilled in this generation or the next, because fate has all of eternity to find its way. Cronus had devoured his children to avert the prophecy. Zeus devoured his wife. The method was different. The motivation was exactly the same: fear. The same fear that drove Uranus to imprison his children in Tartarus. The same fear that led Cronus to swallow his own. The same fear that now kept Zeus watchful upon his throne, observing every child, every god, every creature in the cosmos, with the eyes of one who knows that at any moment, from any direction, the one who would displace him could arrive. The Iliad shows a Zeus who rules with firmness, but who is not immune to doubt. A Zeus who weeps for his mortal sons when he watches them fall in battle. A Zeus who is torn between compassion and the demands of fate. A Zeus who at times seems more human than divine, trapped between his infinite power and the limitations that destiny imposes even upon the gods. Because that was the true punishment of the throne of Olympus. It was not the weight of the thunderbolt. It was not the responsibility of ruling over gods and mortals. It was the certainty that all power is borrowed, that every throne is built upon the ruins of another, that every king carries within himself the seed of his own downfall. Uranus discovered this when his youngest son mutilated him. Cronus learned it when his youngest son dethroned him, and Zeus knew it with a clarity that none of his predecessors had possessed, because he did not merely know the story. He was the story. He was the living proof that the cycle does not stop, that prophecy cannot be destroyed, only postponed. Mortals worshipped him in temples that soared toward the clouds. At Olympia, his sanctuary housed a statue of gold and ivory that stood over 12 meters tall, crafted by Phidias, considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Zeus sat upon a throne with the goddess of victory in one hand and a scepter crowned with his emblem in the other. His gaze was that of a father and a judge, of a protector and a destroyer, of a god who knew the cost of every decision he had ever made. And so he remains in the memory of humankind, not as a perfect god, not as a flawless ruler, but as the purest and most brutal embodiment of what absolute power means. Zeus dethroned his father, freed his siblings, won 3 cosmic wars, survived the only defeat of his existence, and ruled the universe for longer than any mortal can imagine. But he never freed himself from fear. He never escaped the prophecy. He never stopped looking over his shoulder, expecting to see the shadow of the sun who would one day do to him what he had done to Cronus. The thunder of Olympus was not merely a display of strength, it was a warning, a reminder that the sky had a master. But it was also a sound that concealed something deeper, something that mortals never heard, the heartbeat of a god who was afraid. Because that is what endures from the myth of Zeus beyond the destroyed temples, the statues reduced to dust, and the prayers that no one utters anymore. It is not the glory, it is not the victory, it is not the thunderbolt that split the sky. What endures is the truth that the Greeks understood before any other civilization. Absolute power does not liberate, it chains. Every throne is a prison with a view of the world. Every crown weighs more than the mountain that Zeus hurled upon Typhon. And every ruler, however divine, lives with the same silent certainty that Uranus felt when the sickle of Cronus descended upon him. Someone will come. Someone always comes. Zeus knew it the day he dethroned his father. He knew it the day he swallowed Metis. He knew it every time one of his sons performed a feat that surpassed what seemed possible. And he knew it every night, seated upon his throne on Olympus, with the thunderbolt in his hand and the stars at his feet, gazing into the darkness that stretched beyond the constellations, waiting. The cycle was not broken, it was only paused. And that pause, that endless wait between the prophecy and its fulfillment, is perhaps the greatest punishment that fate reserved for the most powerful of all gods. Because Cronus at least had an ending, Uranus at least was defeated. But Zeus was condemned to something worse than defeat. He was condemned to wait, to rule knowing that every dawn could be the last, to be the most feared god in the universe and at the same time the most fearful. And that is the truth that echoes from the ruins of Olympus to the world we inhabit today. That power is not sustained by force, it is sustained by vigilance. And vigilance, sooner or later, exhausts even the immortals. If this story touched something within you, write in the comments. I too carry my own thunder.